In this special episode of the Toolbox, I'm going to go over the annual State of CSS Survey and talk about why it helps me figure out what I need to learn. The pace of the web is relentless, and the Toolbox is here to help you stay on target. It's time to let go and get it going. Hello everyone, this is Rey Villalobos and I stream about front-end and full-stack tools, normally Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. So follow me and subscribe on all the social media things for more content. If you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, raybo.org. All right, normally I'd have a bunch of different segments coming up on the show, but I was taking a peek at one of the things that I really love to keep track of every year, and that is this State of CSS survey, which really sort of helps me figure out where I'm at in terms of what I already know about CSS. And there's a lot of other related surveys that I find really useful, but this is one of the ones that I wait for all year. I never know when it's going to drop, but I just noticed that it came up on my feed, and I thought I'd share some of the things that I learned from reading it and how I actually use it to see what I need to learn and what is sort of coming up on the world of CSS and the web that I need to pay attention to. So there's actually 3 different surveys that I keep track of, and this is just one of them. So I did want to show you the different surveys. So first off is this survey called the State of JS. And of course, it is about JavaScript. The thing that I like about this one and the State of CSS is that they are very, very granular. So this survey has about, I think, 27,000 different respondents. Let me see, it's 23,765 respondents. So it is a little bit bigger than the State of JS. The other survey that I keep track of is this one called the Stack Overflow Developer Survey. What I like about this survey is that it's a lot more about the developer profiles, where people are from, experience, how long they've been coding. Every year they ask slightly different questions. So sometimes they'll ask things about, like, where did you learn techniques? When did you start learning coding? And it's really very broad. So you can see that here you're asking about executive roles, and you can see also things about education. So this is always pretty interesting, how many people have degrees. You can see that it's kind of growing this year. So I like the survey, but it's not super specific. If you look at this technology section, you'll notice that it has everything from JavaScript to like Python, C++, PowerShell, everything. And it's a much huger survey. So they're usually about 80,000 respondents for this survey. So it's a bigger sample than the CSS survey that I'll show you in a minute. But just as important to me is, the pace of the web is so crazy that it's useful to keep track of things like CSS. So this is the State of CSS survey that I was talking about, and I want to go over the findings. Now, it's really only about 8,714 respondents, and these surveys definitely have a bias towards the US, but I think that any kind of data is good data to me. And so I think that it is one of the things that I like to see, because it gives me some information about what's happening on the CSS specifically. So you do have to take things with a grain of salt. It's not a perfect survey, but it's pretty interesting. So, and I'll show you how I use it, because I think it does, it will sort of show you what is important about the survey. It's not necessarily what you learn, but the resources that are attached to that. So I do have some URL. So let me go ahead and make sure that I pull these up. So if you want to go to these different surveys, there's the URLs. You can see that the URL for the Stack Overflow survey is a little bit longer. It also has been going on for a lot longer. And these other surveys, the JavaScript and the CSS survey, have been going around for less time, but they are starting to provide some historical data about some of the tools that we're using and how their usage is changing year over year. So if you don't sort of fill it out, I highly recommend that you do that. In any one of these surveys, you should see sort of at the very beginning a place where you can, in this case with the State of CSS, you can put in your email here, and then you'll get a notification when the survey goes out. Usually goes out a little bit earlier in the year, and then by the time they process them, they build all these amazing looking sites. By the way, the sites are pretty cool. That it takes a while, so usually this particular one by the end of the year. The other one's probably more in the middle of the year. So they're pretty amazing, and you should add yourself to this so that you can actually gives people a lot of information. If you find it useful, then you should definitely fill it out and get on the mailing list, at least if all you want to do is get the results. So let's go and start with the demographics section of the survey. So let's click on this. This is a lot of times is a little bit controversial because, as I mentioned, the survey is primarily a U.S. survey. But if you look at it, you can see 1,200 respondents, 14% is just coming from the U.S. And wow, take a look at Russia. For some reason, there's a lot of Russian responses. So I'm not sure why this is. It is a newer survey, and I think that the more people know about it, the more people will fill it out and we'll get better data in the future. Canada is, I need to talk to my friend Morton. Canada is really not where it should be, I think. 225 respondents from there. Brazil does pretty well. Where I'm from, where I was born, Panama, it's really low. It's like only one person filled it out. So we really have to, Panama, we have to work on this. Australia, also sort of a big amount of respondents. India always does a little bit better, and then some of these European countries, France, Spain, Germany, always does pretty well, as well as England, the UK, and such. So that's pretty interesting. Of course, if you look at the language, you'll notice that almost everybody fills this out in English. I don't know how long they've been offering the different languages, but even developers, because a lot of times they're developing with languages that, computer languages that that were made in English, this is pretty normal. So you can also see that you can often look at the data, so you can actually see this in tabular form, and you can actually get this as JSON or even GraphQL. So that's pretty amazing, and export any of this data as well. So look for these icons. As I mentioned, this site is pretty amazing. And let's see if there's anything else. So age, this is pretty interesting. So most developers that answer the survey are in the 24 to 34 range, and or the 35 to 44. So 24 to 44, maybe you can squeeze in some of these numbers here, but that's kind of interesting. And that, probably developers kind of tend to burn out and not maybe last longer. Again, I think that take this with a grain of salt. These numbers are probably a little bit skewed towards younger people. Also, I found this pretty interesting that the years of experience here, are skewing like a lot later. So there's a lot of people with 10 to 20 years of experience. So if you're only 24 and you have 10 years of experience, I guess you started coding when you were 14. I guess that could happen. Maybe a lot of people start coding like in high school, but I thought that was interesting. Like, I don't know. Anyways, company size, interesting. A lot of bigger companies, I guess, are filling out this survey. So I don't know how this survey kind of gets broadcast into people, but it's pretty interesting to see these numbers. And then higher education, interesting. I mean, if you look at the Stack Overflow survey, it has better data about the demographics, I think. Do you have a high education degree? This one claims, here that most of the people on the web have a higher education degree in a related field. So maybe some of that is shifting. I would tend to trust the Stack Overflow survey a little bit better, especially when it comes to trends for this. And then, because I think that a lot of people, especially who started out in web development, started in an unrelated field, or didn't have a degree. So I personally have a master's in, computer information and technology, but my BA was in journalism. So I used to be on this camp until I continued my education. And then salary. So it's not a secret that developers make pretty good money, but this is also uh, annual salary in US dollars, and you would have to break it up by country. Again, I wouldn't pay too much attention to this data until the survey gets a little bit bigger, and I think that the other source is a lot better. The developer survey from Stack Overflow is a lot better and gives you a lot more of that data, and it's also ran a lot longer with a much larger sample size. But it's still interesting to take a look at these things. So let's see. So source, I'm not sure. I guess where the people fill the survey out. So this can probably explain a lot that most of the sort of results came from Twitter, some Google, but Twitter by far, YouTube, and then some of these other places as well were linking to the survey. Wow, so Sarasota, and it actually is actually source in here, Jen Simmons. So a lot of people are talking about this survey. And we probably need more people to do it because I think it's really interesting to look at some of this data. All right, so let's go into features. So this is actually the more interesting part of the survey is how are people using this, and then how, what sort of things are they using currently on, in their day-to-day jobs. And also a lot of the answers here will be about how do they like things. Do they are people okay? So if you look at the original survey, you'd be able to see that the questions that they ask you is, let's talk about this particular feature. Say they're asking about, I don't know, say something like grid. They'll ask a question: are you using grid? And then do you know about it? Do you know about these features? Some of these features like subgrid are pretty new, so you're not going to have a lot of people who know the feature and have used it. Even lower because it's really not well supported in a lot of browsers, and that's where the difference between these circles are. But this can show you kind of a lot of things about these different properties that have appeared. And the nice thing is that this is also presented in different ways, and then you'll see it that it breaks it down even further in places. So let's see. If we take a look at by awareness, I think that this is a much interesting way of looking at it. Nice animations, by the way. So you could see that people know that there is something called CSS Grid the most, but Flexbox, if you look at by usage, Flexbox is actually the thing that people have the most experience. Now, you do even have to take this with a grain of salt because I think that a lot of times, have you used it? I mean, like if you've used a little bit of CSS Grid, you could say that you've used it. So it's not really clear how well do people necessarily, what kind of experience do they actually have with this. But it's interesting to see sort of the breakdown, and you can roll over these and get to the different sort of features. So if we take a look at what's sort of really, what are people really using on the web, Flexbox. Now, this is specifically position sticky. So clearly CSS position is something that everybody uses, but position sticky is super popular. So that is where you scroll, say that you assign position sticky to this element, and then maybe when you scroll past the top, it would actually stick to the top of the page. That's what that is. So grid, the calc function, super popular. I mean, this ratio, 94%, that is amazing, right? Custom properties or CSS variables. Also, a lot of people starting to really use that on a day-to-day basis. Area attributes, which is great. This is for usability principles. And then you can see the list of all the other things. So some of these things that are down here are probably pretty new. CSS Houdini has been out for a while, but it just hasn't sort of taken like the community hasn't really sort of done a lot with it. So let me say hello, everyone, to everyone on the chat because people are already dropping in. So I appreciate that. All right, so yeah, you could see sort of the breakdown. I think that's pretty interesting. So knowledge score, this will be how of all the people features mentioned, how well do you think you know these things? So it feels like people are in the middle about the amount of experience on these different features. Let's go through layout, because I think this is even where it gets even more interesting, because this breakdown is by year, and you can see sort of the trajectory of a feature like CSS Grid that a lot of people know about, but now it's starting to seem like a lot of people are using it. And this is probably one of the ways that I would use this survey. You know, when CSS Grid came out, I didn't really feel like, you know, I am maybe a little bit averse to sort of new features when they first come out, just like everybody else, I imagine. You're busy, you've got a lot of things to do. You know, you're covering like a lot of other things. In my case, like I cover a lot of frameworks and stuff. So when something brand new is announced that I know is still like in the experimental stage, perhaps not all browsers have sort of started to use them. I don't necessarily jump into it right away, even though, you know, although my job it is to learn things. Specifically, CSS isn't necessarily something that I'm always in the cutting edge for. That's probably more like Morton's sort of thing. You can see that it's really gaining traction though. So a lot of people are getting used to using CSS Grid, and let's see. And the other way that I like to use this survey is if I don't understand or have a question about whether or not a feature is currently something that I need to be using or that is available to me, then you can click on this "Can I use" link right here, and it'll take you to "Can I use" for that particular feature. So you could see, okay, nobody's really using IE anymore, I don't think. Although, I don't know, maybe they are. But you could see that this has pretty good browser support, of course. So that's good. And then you can also, and I'll command click this time, you can also click on this MDN link, which gives you the Mozilla Development Network documentation with some good examples and some more information about it. So whenever you see something that you maybe don't recognize, you can jump down here and take a look at a reference of it, which is great. For example, the subgrade would be one where a lot of people maybe have heard about it or don't even know about it. So look, very few people have used it, right? And when you click on the "Can I use" link, you could see that it's really not something you should be using today, because the only browser with support for this right now is Firefox. So until you maybe see other browsers have more support, maybe it isn't something that you need to worry about so much. But maybe you can go to MDN and take a look at what that means, what subgrade means, and you can determine whether or not it's something that you kind of want to mess with. And again, I mean, looking at this graph, I would say, I mean, unless you want to be in the cutting edge, maybe this is something that you can wait a little bit of time until there's more documentation support and maybe a lot more tutorials on it. I mean, I think for us, like people who work on education, I think that I feel like a lot of times people want to sort of release, you know, the first video so that it gets a lot of traffic on a new feature. I feel like I'm more like blue collar. I want to use features when I know they have solid support. So I don't necessarily look so much at this kind of thing. So Flexbox, I mean, pretty surprising that Flexbox has so much sort of usage and understanding. So it's pretty much the sort of de facto way that people lay things out. They'll jump into Grid for certain things. Grid is better sometimes, but Flexbox does a lot of what you need, and there's some things that it can do that CSS Grid can. So if you have, you know, I feel like everybody is using Flexbox. So if you're one of these, I don't know, 1%, 0.3% that I've heard of it, but not sure what it is, then there's a lot of ways to use this. So this is kind of interesting. CSS multi-column. I thought we had that like eons ago, or at least in HTML. But the interesting thing about this, let's take a look at the "Can I use" data for this. And actually, I'm going to click on this and see if when I go back, if it'll jump me to the same place or if I have to scroll. So "Can I use" looks like it's got pretty good support. I felt like this has been around for a while. But yeah, so pretty good support, although there's some of these sort of green things, which means partial support. So it looks like things are starting to adopt it. So it does not support the values of void in the column. So there's some things missing. Sort of good support. I have seen this drop, and something like Tailwind CSS has. So it looks like I do have to scroll. Tailwind CSS just added that in version 3. So even the frameworks are having some support for it, but perhaps it isn't something that you need to worry about quite yet. But I think it's kind of cool. Like, you can make a piece of your layout have a certain number of columns for a lot of texting. Think of like a magazine, kind of the 3-column layout. The screens are getting so big that I think that eventually this will be a pretty substantially useful feature. The screens are getting so big that sometimes, you get text that is so long that it's hard to read because the line width is really huge. So very annoying. So we'll say, let's see. I see that we have. So I need to move these somewhere. So hello, Wayne. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Glad you're there. And also whoever, I don't know why LinkedIn sometimes now when I'm using Ecamm Live. So I think on the this is actually Caesar. So on my screen it comes in as LinkedIn user. But hello, Caesar. Glad you're here. So let's see. And thank you for commenting too. I appreciate that. Because sometimes I don't know if anybody's actually listening. So a lot more people end up looking at this later anyways. So CSS writing mode, I have to admit, I don't even understand this very much. Defines variables. This is actually pretty useful. So it allows you to have options for left to right text and right to left text as well. So like Hebrew or Arabic scripts. That's a pretty big thing. Let's take a look at, oops, I don't want to click on this. Well, I mean, it looks like it's got pretty good browser support. So it's something that you could start using. And again, you've seen a lot of frameworks start providing support. So if you look at, for example, Bootstrap has support for right to left format. But now this is going to be embedded into CSS itself. Yeah, so, oh, look, okay, thank you, Caesar. Caesar is in private mode, so that's fine. That's fine. No big deal. Yeah, so I think that CSS writing modes are going to be pretty cool, and you're probably going to be it's something you need to learn because it's really good to provide support for everyone. So this is going to be a great addition to the language. It's something that you should probably learn how to implement it, and it's also, I think, relatively easy to do. So all you do is you add something to your code that says this thing supports the proper orientation, and then you just turn it on. So I think that if you look at how Tailwind uses this is actually pretty easy to implement. So it isn't a big deal. And also, I think Bootstrap does a good job by letting you import like a separate style sheet. All right, so position sticky. I was surprised that it got that much usage. It's a nice little feature. If you don't know about it, pretty cool. So definitely something that I think this is one of those neat features that you learn to use because they're sort of cool, not necessarily because it's something that you are going to, not be able to live without, but something that you could live without, but it's a cool feature. So logical properties. So this is going to be, I think, one of the things that I would sort of put a pin on, because pretty good browser support. Okay, IE, it doesn't really matter if IE doesn't support things. It's such a small part of the usage. So like 0.68% usage is really tiny. So unless you have to support perhaps some government organizations that are using pretty old browsers. I don't even know who uses Opera Mini, but evidently they're doing better than Internet Explorer. And Opera Mobile even has some support in the newer versions of it. So logical properties, I think this will be pretty good. So, logical properties are going to be just another sort of logical properties and values. So control of layout through logical rather than physical. So this will be a feature that you'll want to sort of keep track of, but it's not really that important that you have experience with it. Yes, aspect ratio. This is another one of those really cool utility features. So, it's always frustrating when you have a video on your page or some sort of like maybe a CSS embedded like a playground code playground, and I don't even know how CSS displays that normally, but it's always like the wrong size, or it's a hard hard coded size, and it looks awful on your site because it doesn't maintain a proportion. So this aspect ratio, I think, is going to be pretty big, and it's fairly, I think, easy to implement. So yeah, it looks like it's got decent browser support, and that it's going to be fairly easy. So you'll be able to specify a ratio. And I've seen a lot of tutorials. So this is just a CSS property that you add to stuff, and then you can specify an aspect ratio. So you definitely should know about that, and also just start using it. So content visibility. Okay. I'm not even sure what the heck that is. Maybe somebody could help. Content visibility when elements are rendered. So rendering can be skipped for elements. Now, oh, that's interesting. So maybe this will help with when sometimes like you get a lot of maybe reloading of styles. A lot of times like you use something like Vue.js, and some of the items maybe haven't loaded some of the content. So maybe this would help with something like that. I'm surprised they didn't put an MDN like. So this is honestly something that I'm not very familiar with. Gap property. I actually love using this property for Flexbox, but I was surprised that it doesn't have that much sort of usage behind it. And some missing support, although most browsers are starting to use this thing. Um, I love using this just to control the spacing in between like columns. And it's available in a lot of places like Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS. So break rules. So interesting. So you can control how breaks behave before a generated box. So interesting. Another one that I've never heard of. So if anybody's heard of some of these things that I haven't heard of, then please let me know in the comments. Also, Wayne, I appreciate that. I love my teaching too. Also, the fact that I actually get to do teaching is amazing. So I really just started doing these streams to a lot of times to sort of meet some of the people that watch some of my stuff. So very happy to find you people in here. So container queries when creating a responsive design immediate. Oh, so this is actually really huge. So container queries is one of the things that is like, if you look, like everybody is making a video on container queries. I think that it's pretty much in flux right now. Yeah, look at this. No browser support. So this is one of those features that you have to enable under a Chrome flag. So don't worry about this yet. What makes it super cool, and why I think that I don't know if I will say that it'll be the breakout feature. So you could see these little flag things means that in all these browsers you can actually turn on this feature. But the problem is that it's so deep in development that a lot of browsers require you to turn on the flags, and it's also going to be changing. So if you were to like say, oh, I'm going to take some time to really learn and maybe start using this on some sites, you might be disappointed because it already experienced some changes in the format. So it's not something that I would sort of worry about. Okay, so the feature. So the basics of this feature is that you normally use media queries to control maybe the width or size of elements, or what happens when something is on an item of a specific size. And that's super. That's responsive design, and that's how the whole web is really built today. But sometimes when you have multiple items on screen, you have perhaps items next to items in different containers. And sometimes like the media query, the size of the viewport, the size of the screen isn't the thing that you want to have control over the layout of the elements. So if you have, again, like if you have an, say, a one versus a two column view, when you have a two column view, sometimes you're like, well, I would like this item that doesn't have that many elements in it to maybe have less or more space around it. I'm probably not doing the most fantastic job. But so container queries allow you to create media queries that are on a container by container level. So you can ask questions like, how much room does this item currently have? Who cares about the viewport? Depending on the width of the browser on the viewport, you can say, how much room do I have to display something here, and control the display of those elements depending on how much room you have as opposed to the size of the viewport, because we know that sometimes the layouts just don't look good at certain sizes, but because it's going or it's aligning itself to the viewport, it doesn't really give you sort of detailed control over those things. This is also meaning that, for me anyways, that it's getting a lot harder to lay things out on the web, and this is one of the questions later on. But if I were to say what's the sort of most hype feature of the web, it's probably this one, container queries. I would say don't worry about it quite yet, but it's something that you're gonna be expected to know, especially if you're really focused on design. So let's go to shapes and graphics. CSS shapes, geometric shapes that you can use for CSS. So let's take a look at the usage for this thing. Pretty good, not bad. And so shapes, I think they're great, but I mean, it's great to be able to have shapes and also be able to sort of, do layouts that are aligned to the shapes. But I don't know, like, does this really make this easier to read? I'm not sure that I love this kind of layout, but some people really want to. Yeah, so somebody actually dropped in the draft. So let me. Oops, sorry, I did add it in here. So somebody did drop the draft to that one of those features in there. So check that out. Thank you very much, LinkedIn user. I know it's Caesar, but I'll say it's LinkedIn user. All right, so this is one that I've seen attempt to like be part of the web for a long time, but I'm not sure that I love this because I think what will happen is a lot of people would love to create magazine line layouts, magazine style layouts, and I'm not sure that that's the best thing for the web. So, but CSS shapes, I mean, it's good to have those things. Sometimes you do want to wrap around specific shapes. It's pretty cool. So perhaps something you should learn, but you could see by the usage that not everybody is there yet. So object fit lets you see how the content of a replace element should be resized to fit its container. So this maybe has to do with like reload, like when you load things, sometimes you want them to be. Oh no, this is I'm completely off. I know what this is. This is actually fantastic, and you should totally know and possibly use this. So if you've been using CSS for a while, you know how you have like you can take a background image and you can make it container fit proportionally to the size of an element. So much so that I used to convert my carousel images to background images with JavaScript so that I'll be able to proportionally resize them, right? So this actually gives you the same ability with just a simple object fit property, that you can use the same sort of values that you would use for for background images, but now you could do that with CSS. So this is one of the features that I love. And let's take a look at the usage, because I have it. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So go for it. Love it. You're going to think it's fantastic. I love this feature. So clip path, clipping region, that sets part of an element should be sets what part of an element should be shown. Okay, I'm not really that familiar with this. I'm gonna go to, well, let's take a look at both the usage. Sort of a little bit variable. There's some features of this not quite ready. And clipping path, so clipping path circle. Yeah, I haven't really used this one, so I really couldn't tell you that much. What the heck it's actually trying to do. Oh, okay, so actually you can clip things to like an SVG type path, which is pretty awesome. That's nice. And create some really interesting clipping paths. Okay, I like it. I think I saw a demo of Tailwind CSS where the guy who demoed was using this. So you would combine this with the other property. So you would combine clip path with object fit to make something not only have an interesting clip path, but then also align itself to that clip path. So check that out. I think I'll be checking that out actually. I think it opens up things to like new things. So CSS masks related. This module seemed to be trying to sort of get into the specs for a long time. Not perfect support, but masking, just masking elements. So just it's similar to the other one again. So I don't know why it's in here separate from, I guess, no, clip path. Was that similar to clip path? Although this is a path and this is maybe a mask. So that it would be interesting if we had like, if we're able to define like a bitmap as a mask. I would totally love that. I don't know if this is what this is. So maybe somebody knows about that. All right. Blend mode's pretty interesting. So what happens when, so think about like in Photoshop, how you can combine things according to different blend modes. I love that feature. Been waiting for it to get on the web. So it's something that you should maybe look into learning. Decent support, not perfect. Safari, come on, get with it. Not perfect, but it's definitely so cool. And I think that you can make it so that if somebody doesn't have support for this, then maybe they would just see an image. But I really want blend modes because a lot of times, for example, like I'll have an element and I want to just put a little bit of darkness like underneath. So I usually do like a transparent background image. It's a little bit messy, so maybe blend modes would help with something like that. Filter effects, another thing that I've used from using Tailwind. They have a lot of these CSS filter effects, really good stuff. Again, making CSS a little bit more complicated. All these things, background filter and filter effects, are pretty cool. So they just allow you to create what happens when something is on top of something else. How, and you can modify elements. And honestly, I love this. We should have this, the ability to rotate the hues, the ability to, change the color of the drop shadow pretty easily. So I love this and I want this to be a thing already. So let's see, perspective. Hasn't perspective been around forever? I guess maybe for 3D. That's definitely not something I know. Color gamut, I guess that I thought you could. Uh, Interesting. I mean, so color gamut, I think, has to do with the amount of colors that are visible, or in this case, are supported by the user agent. I guess if you're targeting some devices that don't support this, maybe that would be something interesting. So that's a new one that I don't know if I would necessarily use that much. And neither would I kind of worry too much about perspective because I thought there was already, so maybe this has to, oh, I see. So this is really for 3D elements and how, almost like the focal length of the lens, the effect that creates. So that's useful if you're doing 3D. I don't really get into 3D too much. So this one's a doozy. The intrinsic minimum width of the content. All right, so I don't really know this one. Let's see, because sometimes I think I don't know them, but I actually do. This is actually trying to fix some of the issues that we have when we are, when you design a website and you have like a lot of text and you end up with text on a container that's really wide. Uh, you know, should that content try to fit the box a little bit better? So this is kind of trying to help you with that. So I don't know if, so if it has more text, then it should kind of display a little bit differently, right? So that's really useful. It's more, I guess, for typography. I have seen this and see, like, if I just saw the name of it sometimes, I don't know that I've actually used this, but I've actually used this in Tailwind. Again, Tailwind's actually introducing me to a lot of this. Conic gradient, I don't know if I even want that, or if anybody, I mean, does anybody do like conic gradients? I'm not a fan because they have these like harsh line right here, and I never use it, but I guess there's enough people that are into it. Or maybe you could create some more interesting. I mean, some of the stuff is good to have, but not necessarily something that I'm going to be using on my day to day. So there's a lot more of these, I guess. Let's see, what are we on? Shapes and graphics. So I'm going to go a little bit faster on some of these, and then I'm going to get into technologies, which I think are also a really good sort of feature. Let me just check on time to see how I'm doing. So interactions, CSS scroll snap. Let's see, this is just scrolling and overflow behaviors in addition to touch actions, which is interesting. So anyways, I think you should probably just go through this and take a look at anything that sounds interesting. Click around on things like, can I use an MDN if you don't understand something? I think that because I've done the Tailwind CSS course, I'm actually more familiar with some of these than anything else. So initial letter, why are people trying to make this a thing? I guess some people miss the way that books look. So initial letter should let you control the size of the initial letter. Okay, I thought that this is not a really good result. Well, anyways, font variant, no metric app use this. So lets you, this is actually, I think, useful because oftentimes you want something other than a bullet. And I think that this lets you control that. Actually, no, this is actually lets you turn on variant. So with ligatures and some of these other things that are available now, you have these different sort of glyphs and fonts. And so you can actually turn those on and off. I think this is one of those sort of interesting and cool features. I would have to check support. It's good to know that it exists, but I don't know that I would uh, worry about it too much, I guess. If I was maybe displaying some data and I wanted to make sure that I had the zeros with a slash on it, that could be pretty useful. Or making sure that you turn that on code or maybe ligatures and stuff. So lots of other stuff in here. Variable fonts, super awesome. Accessibility features as well. This has been pretty important lately on the web. Prefers reduced motion. Allows you to turn on excessive motion on websites through a default. So you can modify the way a website looks so that it doesn't animate or, cause problems with people who can't handle a lot of motion. And then let's see. So yeah, this is actually, oh my gosh, this is so popular because everybody likes to have the option of using dark mode. So this lets you choose whether or not you use a light or dark color scheme. So I don't even know what other features are. So okay, this is weird because this is probably one of the most used features on the web now. Variables, which are got the worst name. I don't know why they call them custom properties. I always, whenever I read custom properties, I think, oh, do I really know what that means? And then I go, oh, that's just variables whenever I see the definition of it. So definitely learn about variables. They're pretty useful, and I think they're going to revolutionize the design on the web. So supports queries, declarations based on browser support of a specific item. So that's cool. Containment. I don't remember. This feels like one that I know, but I haven't really used it that much. So contain, how many contents are independent of the rest of the document tree? Okay. Oh, I have used this, but it isn't sort of that useful. So, anyways, I wouldn't worry too much about that one. Okay, let's get into technologies because I think this is where I think I get a lot out of this section. So this section is about what people like to use, how satisfied they are in using things they're trying to avoid, and I guess determining whether they want to be using something. So you see Bootstrap sitting over here in the analyze section. I imagine that at some point this would be like way the heck up here, but people are starting to sort of rethink of whether or not they should use something like Bootstrap. I think that the new web appears to be just a very much component sort of based design structure. So people are going to component based architectures like Vue.js and React. And so something like Bootstrap isn't as useful because it doesn't really work as well. And that's why people are really using Tailwind a lot more, Tailwind CSS a lot more. I wish they had more historical data on how specifically Tailwind has increased in popularity. But interesting to see post CSS here as well, because post CSS is really just a way of allowing you or transform in CSS. And usually, a lot of times, it's used to let you use, um, you know, new features on browsers that don't support it. It is part of Tailwind and probably part of other things. So it's interesting to see it so high here. Also interesting, of course, to see Sass like all the way out here. And this is probably just because Sass still does some things that CSS hasn't been able to do. And we are going to get support to two things that Sass is doing eventually. So eventually Sass, I think, will be like go the way of Bootstrap, start being less important to the community, but still something that you should definitely learn today if you're going to a place that uses this. Once I think Bootstrap even drops Sass, maybe it'll go down a little bit as well. CSS modules always is trying to be a thing. I have a hard time. It's fantastic for component-based architectures, but I have a hard time really thinking that people are going to enjoy it, because it's almost like CSS for developers, it seems like. Also, CSS eventually will get a lot of more and more developy type things, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. So I don't know what style. JSX, look at Ant Design. This is like a framework. Bulma, same thing. I have no idea what AstroTurf is, but it's always good to see this, to see where things are and look at the things that are going away. Okay, this is weird, because I really actually like Assembler CSS, and it's way the heck down here. So some people must have really not liked it. It's one of those controversial features. If you look for previous episodes, you'll see that I do cover this, and I do a demo of Assembler CSS. I think it's going to be maybe it has the potential for growth. Let me just put it that way. So interesting. Let's see. Cardinality. Okay, that's too much words for me, so I'm going to skip that. Yeah, CSS and JS really trying to become a thing. Frameworks, I think, are here to stay. Pre and post processors, totally. CSS and JS. I don't know. Maybe somebody can tell me if they like CSS and JS. All right. Processors, ranking. So processors, post CSS is king. Again, I think a lot of people use it to let you do some of these latest features and have compatibility with older browsers. Sass is still going strong. So let's take a look at satisfaction for all these things are great, and look at Assembler CSS. Actually made the list, so that's pretty impressive. Like, it wasn't even there before. So this will be interesting to note if it jumps up in usage next year or later on, because I think it's a really interesting idea. I'm not sure, but it's interesting. All right, so interest, what do people want to know? So there you can see that Assembler kind of jumped up in interest, whereas Sass, it went down in interest, and post CSS went up. And then where people actually use it, by far, Sass is still a huge part of the internet. So that's not going away. And awareness, that's where these things are. Experience over time. So looks like post CSS is growing in the amount of experience that people are getting with it. So I did a course on post CSS like a few years ago. So interesting. Maybe it's finally going to get a ton of views. Sass, look, it's maybe dwindling a little tiny bit in interest, but it's so pervasive in the industry that I don't think it's going anywhere for a while. So good to know. Positive, negative split. Yeah, that's pretty much my analysis. So other tools, style components, Tailwind CSS. Yeah, this is becoming pretty huge on the web, and I noticed that in my courses as well. CSS and JS, again, trying to be a thing. CSS modules, all these things. I don't even know, why is React here as a thing? I don't know. All right, how happy are you with the state of processors? Yeah, looks people are pretty happy. CSS processors are doing a great job. So yeah, cool stuff. So framework. So this is also interesting. Look at that Tailwind CSS go. So this is satisfaction. I would have to agree. I know that there's people that hate it, but once you start using it, if you can rewire your brain, it's really neat, and it makes a lot of sense. But you really have to go through go through a process of acceptance of it. So if you haven't used it before, I don't know most of these actually. So I have heard of Pure CSS, and I've gone to the website. It looks like Material Design, so it looks pretty good, but I don't know why it's so high in satisfaction. So maybe something that I'll have to take a look at. Ant Design, also don't know. Bulma I've heard of, but I haven't really used it. Semantic UI I've heard of. Materialize, again, material design sort of thing. UI Kit, I have heard more and more of this one, so maybe something to experiment. And Bootstrap, oh my, loving Bootstrap is going down a little bit. So Foundation, oh man, this used to be as huge as Bootstrap in the old days, but it's really gone down. It's like a Bootstrap that has a lot more components in it. Very fun at the time, but yeah. So interesting to see the things graphed here. I don't know what I could get out of this other than Tailwind's on the rise, definitely. Bootstrap is on the slight decline, but still so pervasive in the industry that it's going to have a hard time. And also, I think that one of the things that happened with Bootstrap was before the last version dropped, they announced that they would maybe switch to post CSS, and they didn't. And that's where I think same thing happened with React and Angular. Um, React started to do things that Angular wouldn't do. The same way I think that Tailwind started to do the things that Bootstrap didn't do, and that's why it's doing really well. It's still not the perfect tool because it's cumbersome if you're not using component-based architectures, but still pretty good. Yeah, so somebody says that they saw Windy on top of Tailwind and user satisfaction in the first graph, but it wasn't included here. Interesting. So Windy CSS is another one of those that I covered in a previous episode. So check that out. I love Windy CSS, but with the new version of Tailwind, I think it's going to be hard for it to break out because the just-in-time compiler of Tailwind is really good. But whoever did Windy did that a while back. So I don't know if the Tailwind people looked at that and said, hey, we better do like a just-in-time compiler. So, and then they did it. But yeah, it's definitely something to see. I hope that they actually started another, I can't remember the name of it, but they actually started another one that was almost like more of the assembler CSS, or the things that are interesting about assembler CSS. Came into this language. I can't remember the name of it right now, but I actually covered it in the last episode, so you can take a look at that. I think that those are a couple of interesting ideas to sort of take a peek at in the future. So make sure you continue looking at those. Positive negative split. Yeah, if you haven't learned Tailwind, I did some courses. Give it a yeah, that's right. So thanks, Duke. Uno CSS. Yeah, go check that out. I covered it briefly. I think I will do more of a demo on it. It's pretty, I think it's like early alpha right now, but some good ideas that I think are some of the things that I like about assembler, and something that you maybe should sort of take a peek at because it's pretty cool. So very excited for that one as well. So thank you, Duke. Appreciate that. So yeah, this is good to know all these things. Other tools I didn't even know. Man, Material used to be like a lot bigger. Oh, here's Windy CSS. Yeah, this you might see this maybe break out, or maybe we'll see Uno CSS actually appear on this survey next time. I think you'll like it, so check it out. Like I said, maybe wait until I start doing these more regularly again next year. And I want to try it, but when I went to try it last time, I'm like, early alpha. Let's just wait a little bit before I drop into it. So CSS, and why is there even like a thing on the CSS and JS? I'm not like a real fan of this, although I do use it on component-based frameworks. I think something like Tailwind does a fantastic job already. So I don't know. I've never gotten into it enough. So let's take a look at other tools. Utilities. So this is what are people using? Prettier. Everybody loves Prettier. And I think if I click on this, it'll take me to Prettier. So it just formats your code as you're writing it to keep it more consistent. Out of Prefixer, everybody uses that. I'm surprised it's not higher up. This may be just a sort of a likability thing. So Prefixer, that just makes sure that when you write CSS, if some features still require prefixes, that it writes them for you. StyleLint, I don't use that, but it lets you know if you've made any errors while you're writing things. Purge CSS and CSS Nano are pretty cool. These are utilities like Purge CSS will actually, in Tailwind used to use this, so it'll take a look at what you're actually using. So you can say, look at these HTML files, look at this JavaScript files, analyze them to see if they're using any CSS, and then rewrite, get rid of things that I'm not using. So pretty useful. CSS Nano is just for compressing the CSS. I have no idea what Purify is or ACSS, but they're not really that relevant in here. So interesting. Let's see, browsers. Yeah, Chrome is still king. I'm surprised that Firefox is doing this well, although I think that some people claim that the Firefox tools for web development are superior. So perhaps, even though it has a much less usage percentage in the US, for designers, I think it is true. I've seen some things in Firefox that are fantastic. My browser, it happens to be Brave. I'm more concerned, I think, with security. And it does happen to be a Chrome browser, so I don't know how that plays into these numbers. So there's actually browsers that are Chrome based, but have some additional features. So interesting, but not really like life changing here information. Library evaluation rankings. So what factors do you prioritize? Documentation. This is why maybe none of my things are so big because documentation is hard. So until a project has enough support to warrant somebody wanting to document things, uh, then it's not really going to be super successful. But true, like I have covered things that were so difficult to learn that I had to like, you know, get into the code just to be able to sort of relate to them and teach them. So documentation is probably the more important thing than developer experience. Maybe this should be first actually. Whether it's sort of a fun thing to use. Some of these things are like Assembler CSS. It's actually like fun to get into it. Tailwind CSS, it's like fun. So yeah, user experience. Okay, so what happens, I guess, with users? That's good too. Accessibility features. This is a good sort of breakdown of what people find important when they are picking a new framework. So okay, so environment. Didn't I already look at this? Maybe I just was not doing things in order. Okay, so this is accessibility uh, in browsers. I don't know. I don't understand what this data is about. Form factors do you test on? Okay. Yeah, most people just honestly check on their browsers. But then smartphone, tablet, yeah, testing tools, very low kind of usage of that sort of thing. Accessibility features, definitely everybody, man, that's kind of low. Alt texts, semantic markup, everybody should be doing these things. Interesting to see these numbers. I wish this was not only bigger, but also more global, that more people took this test to get better data on what people are actually doing. What project do you use CSS for? Web apps, marketing sites, yeah, pretty normal. Wow, email, that's a tough one because email, CSS on email is like a completely different world. So let's see, resources. Is that interesting? First steps with CSS. How do you learn? Number one thing, 63%. This is huge, right? Self-directed learning. So then you watch some free online courses, maybe on YouTube or um, anywhere else. And then you watch videos and screencasts from people. That's cool. I'm always mad that when you get to specifics that, LinkedIn Learning isn't in there, but hey, we need to drive more people to take the surveys. So what magazines? What's a magazine, right? I think they're only saying that because there's a thing called Smashing Magazine, but it's just really a website. So what do you read? CSS tricks. Everybody checks that. Smashing Magazine is actually a great resource, even though I would question that it's a magazine. Dev.to also pretty good, but it's hard for me. Like it's hard to find things on Dev.to. I think I like more click on articles that people have written that happen to be on this Dev.to, which is kind of like a publishing site. So a list apart, man, I don't really even go there. I haven't gone there in so long. Code drops, I still do. CSS Weekly, no. Front end focus, yes. Side point, barely ever. CSS in real life, don't know what that is. None of these other ones. Front end horse, I actually do subscribe to this, so this is actually a pretty good resource if you haven't seen it. It's kind of like a fun resource. Sites and courses, Stack Overflow. That's funny. 70%. I think it should be like 100%. Just people aren't sort of agree. But this is not really where I consult. It's more like if I need to look up a problem, I go to Stack Overflow. So MDN to me should be first. I always check here. W3 schools, still popular. Maybe they've cleaned up their act. I haven't really done an analysis. Web dev, I don't know. Like, do I check this? Maybe not really. Free Code Camp, I don't know. I feel like I would like it more, but I don't know that I need it as much. But I think it's a good resource if you're trying to learn things. Udemy, how dare you be in here with us not being in here? Wes Boss, really smart dude. You should definitely check out some of his content. Fred and Masters, I subscribe to their mailing list. Definitely check that out. Code Academy, man, I haven't been on that site for a long time. Egghead.io, I feel like I should use this, but no. Again, plural site, how dare you? Okay, we're gonna need to get our peeps to like go fill the survey out. more because clearly they're doing a better job than we are. Level Up Tutorials, yeah. So this is the guy that does a podcast with Wes Boss, has this site. It's pretty impressive that that site shows up in here, but I don't really go there to learn things. Podcasts, I don't really, I don't know. Do you listen to podcasts? I haven't listened to a podcast in a long time, and there's other ones here. So I feel like when I have free time to listen to things, I don't really want to listen to a podcast. And then what people do you follow? Well, I didn't make the list this year. Uh, and what? How is web dev a person? Maybe it's an individual doing that. So who do I listen to? I mean, I think Kevin Powell's like a YouTuber. I've seen some of his stuff. I'm surprised that he's that high. Maybe he really had like a huge push to get people to fill out the survey. Chris, of course, I mean, he's been a mainstay of the web for a long time. It's interesting Sarah showed up so highly here because I feel like there's people that I would trust more or do more stuff with, like Jen, for example, should be high up there. Rachel is really popular on some of these places as well. So Una Kravitz does some fantastic work. So Leah, I'm a big fan. She is like one of the true geniuses of the web. Wes Boss also a genius. So maybe one day I can make this list. Miriam is also pretty awesome. Yeah, super. Paul Irish, man, what's he doing all the way down here in in the gutter? He's like a brilliant person. So man, I mean, I say in the gutter, but he's in the gutter. Like I'm even below the gutter, I guess. So pretty interesting opinion. So this is an interesting part of the survey was, what's your opinion about CSS? And people are feeling pretty good about CSS, but I would say a big caveat is that it might seem like it's easier to learn, but maybe it's difficult to master. I don't think that this kind of, like if you told somebody, oh yeah, it's easy to learn, and then you started teaching it to them, to be like, what the heck are you talking about? Subgrid or something like that. CSS is evolving too slowly. I would guess it's kind of in the middle. I think that it's kind of evolving a little bit fast now, that it's becoming a little bit hard to keep track of. Utility classes should be avoided. Center. So I guess maybe people agree with this. I don't know. Yeah, maybe non-semantic classes. Maybe I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I enjoy writing CSS. Look, everybody's really happy. That's great. That's great. Yeah. So features that people have difficulties with: grid followed by Flexbox gap of all things. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's one of the problems with grid. It's just not the sort of friendliest thing. I mean, as soon as you add fractions to something, fractional widths to something, it sounds like it feels to designers like you're trying to make them do math, which is very challenging. CSS pain points, compatibility isn't as big as it used to be. So, anyways, yeah, I think that is probably towards the end of things that are missing. Container queries. Parent selector. Yes, parent selector. So being able to choose a parent from a child is one of the features that I love about Sass. So bring that in. Browser support. I don't understand even that. Next thing. So these these are almost like Sass features, and maybe that's why a lot of these are kind of like Sass features, and that's why it's still so popular. Subgrid. Okay. Well, I mean, it's already there, so I don't know why it would be a missing feature. I guess because it doesn't have the browser support. Color functions, yeah. Again, this is something that's on Sass. Come on, CSS, like start adding some of these things. How happy are you? Yeah, pretty happy. That's good. General state of CSS, also pretty happy. So awards, I don't know if most adopted feature. Do I click compare some functions? Yeah, that's true. I use that a lot more, and it's kind of a fun one as well. Prefers reduced motion, really? That was like a most adopted feature. That's interesting. Grid really grew this year. I'm pretty impressed with it. Highest satisfaction. That's interesting too, because I feel like if you ask a lot of people, they wouldn't say post CSS as the thing that they have the highest satisfaction with. Maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe people are just really loving it. I feel like it's part of something else, and what you're trying to do with it is just write older things. And here's CSS modules again, trying to peek in. I don't trust you, CSS modules. Stop it. All right, technology. Oh, Great. Okay. Most interested. So, are you really interested in CSS modules? Yeah, I don't agree with this. So, yeah. Conclusion: the way you write CSS is about to change forever. True. Aspect ratio, which I love. Yeah, please bring that. That's really like, is that really going to change that much things? No, not really. It's just going to add a few additional things. Custom properties. If you haven't done stuff with them, yeah, that's going to be pretty big. Container queries, I would consider it the most new, the most hype new thing. Layers will be interesting. Um, these kind of things like when else conditional, that's going to complicate things, but allow you to do interesting things. You'll see some pretty interesting layouts. So that's interesting. So yeah, make sure you go to this and notify, to get notified about the future of this. And I'll say hi to Javier. Hello, Javier. Sorry. Yeah, this is a very unusual time. I just decided that before I'm traveling next week, and then I'll be almost completely off for the rest of the year. But I figured this was such an interesting report. As I was going to it, I'm like, you know what? I think it'd be good to do like a little sort of episode where I talk about what I think about some of these different features and some of the things that I find interesting, upcoming things, which frameworks I think are doing well. So I just decided to do something at the spur of the moment. I wasn't planning on doing a episode 16 quite yet. So I'm really trying to revamp things. So I have some interesting new layouts. So check this out. Let's see. Look at this weird layout. Interesting. Site by site. So I'm playing around with my streaming thing and revamping some of the intro. So you're going to see some changes in the show. And we're really thinking of taking some of the content and perhaps bringing it into other places. So no problem, Javier. You can watch it later. Yeah, saludos. And I will talk to all the rest of y'all later. Thank you for watching. I appreciate that. And hopefully you got something out of it. Let me know in the comments. I'll be coming back really strong next year. And I'll see you then. Goodbye.